Welcome to Sustainable Leadership Live. I'm Lisa Danforth, your host, and today I have the marvelous Miki Feldman Simon with me today. Miki, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your brilliance with us today.
Oh, thank you, Lisa, for inviting me, the marvelous Lisa. So I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you.
And before we jump in, I just want to share a little bit about Miki and why she's showing up and sharing her brilliance today. Miki is an executive coach and the founder of I Am Back at Work. She's a seasoned professional who has held leading executive roles in marketing, business development, and human resource management. And as an entrepreneur, she has founded and co-founded several successful startups and has built and led and coached resilient teams in high-growth startups. And today we're talking about how to live and lead with authenticity, intention, and integrity, all of those building blocks of a really healthy organization, right?
Yes.
So I say, let's jump right in. Where do we start with those building blocks? Where's the foundation that we need to focus on?
People. I think, it all starts with people. We think of organizations, but they're made of people, right? So we have to start with the people themselves and how they're showing up because they're building the organization.
I think we forget that often, right? We want to look at the bottom line. We want to push the people. But it seems like that is what's really thrown us into this burnout. I just learned recently that the World Health Organization is burnout is an actual syndrome, that it's an official one. I'm like, wow, it's sad that we've gotten to that point. But we do need to focus on the people so that we can start moving away from that.
I think it's that, and I also think that it's like we think of organizations, we think of them as something separate, but organizations are built of people. And if you think of all the behaviors of the different people, that creates the culture that can create burnout and sort of so many other things within the organization, positive and negative.
True. Very, very true. So we look at an organization. Do we start at the top, at the C-suite level? Do we start mid-management? Do we start lower? Like, where is it that we can really start making the most amount of impact, most amount of change the fastest?
So it's interesting that you say that. There's research that shows, by the way, that especially in startups, the values that the entrepreneurs, the leaders themselves have, those create the organizational culture. So it is definitely helpful if there's some intention coming from the top, right? Some guidelines, if you want to think about it. How do we want people to behave? How do we want people to treat each other, to treat customers, to all those different organizational values?
Right.
But it also has to be, it comes from everywhere, because we know that people don't leave, they don't just leave the organization, they usually leave their boss, right? So
True.
Yeah. So I think it really is at all the different levels, but we have to be especially intentional when coming from the top with how are we modeling, what behaviors are we showing, and are they aligned with what we're saying as well, right?
I think that's really key. When you sent your intake form and I was looking at it, I'm like, those are the integrity and authenticity are often main core values within individuals as well as corporations, but how do we emulate them? That's the key piece. We can say it, but how does that show up in our organizations, in our leadership, and in our teams, our people? How do we lead that way? Can you talk a little bit about that, of emulating those and how it can drive change?
So I think the first part to it is really identifying what are your intentions? So what are the values that your organization wants to stand up for? We can look at Patagonia and the values that they stand up for. Okay, we can look at Twitter today and what values are they trying to stand up for. So having some clarity around that, what do you believe in? What are your priorities? And that I also, when I work with individuals as an executive coach, it's going back to that with them as well. Like, what are your values? What do you stand up for? So when you show up, you're authentic. Now, with organizations, by the way, the worst thing that they can do is say one thing and do another. Because there's a lot of research, and Ron Corici wrote an amazing book about this, about being honest. and that the research shows that if you say one thing, and let's say you're saying that you're going to be caring, whatever you do, another, you actually create a culture of duplicity. It's okay to say one thing and do another. And then what happens? That's when people start fudging numbers, and
That'll never happen.
No, and that's when they start being dishonest. And in some ways, you're better off not saying anything. Because if you say nothing and that's the way you behave, okay, whether they're a jerk, they don't stand up for anything, but there isn't this duplicity that at the end makes things work or worse, because it's how you become a liar as an organization and an individual, right?
Right. But it also becomes the way that it is. So it's almost a truth within the organization, I think, or within us. We can kind of convince ourselves. I remember reading one of Simon Sinek's books, and he talked about UGR's unwritten ground rules. Those are the actual rules that we go by. We know that this is what the leadership is saying, or this is what the mission is, but it's okay to do this, which is, like you said, it's even worse than not saying anything whatsoever.
Right, it's that duplicity. And if we go back to what should you do is have clarity on what you stand up for, and then really walk the talk. So whether it's walk the talk as an individual or as an organization, and really ask yourself, where are the gaps? So where are the gaps in what you're saying and what your actions are actually demonstrating?
So I'm really hearing core values are really foundational building blocks to build up from. And when we live with intention within those, that builds the integrity and authenticity.
Completely. And if you think about when people are often upset, it's because something doesn't agree with their core values. And the more we're reading about the Great Resignation, the Great Reshuffling, whatever you want to call it, it's people leaving what they call a toxic culture. And often that toxic culture is that something in the values, in what's happening in the organization, is not aligned with their own values.
Can you talk a little bit more about trust? Because I know over the years I have read one of the biggest struggles with teams, corporations, companies, whatnot, larger, is there's a lack of trust with a leadership, and how that really takes away from those building blocks of being able to lead and live sustainably.
Yeah, it's such an important question, because I think trust is that building block. It's that building block for psychological safety. It's that building block for being able to have a conversation of giving feedback or saying, look, this, I don't agree with certain things. So any kind of healthy conflict, if there isn't trust there, it just doesn't work. And the building block of trust is also doing what you said that you're going to do. So it's being true again, going back, you're saying one thing, is that what you're actually doing. And building that trust is key to so many different things within the organization, right, for this success. Because if you think about it, if I don't trust you, that at least I'm going to come on this show and that you're going to ask good questions and whatever, then why would I even come, right? And it's the same thing with everything in an organization or anything that you want to do. When you come from a place of mistrust, all the red alarms are going to go on, right? It's like all that, whether it's negative self-talk or negative assumptions, all of that, it's just not going in the right direction.
For me, this is tying into a word that I say often, which is pause, right? If we're going to agree to something, we need to pause and make sure that it is what we want, that we're in integrity with what we're agreeing to not do. And that allows us to connect to the clarity of the outcome of why we're making the choice, yes or no. Do you have some tools that you could share for people for pausing or gaining clarity before agreeing to something and not following through with it?
So Lisa and I actually met at a conference where we both spoke. And we talked about pause. We talked about it from different directions, but we both quoted Viktor Frankl, right?
That's
And
right.
between, stimulus and response, there is the space, that space to choose your response. So, and that space is where growth, freedom, we can talk about trust. So the pause is one, I think, of the most important tool that I work with my clients, because if you think that pause, often just take a deep breath. Okay, it has a physiological effect on you as well. Learn to create that pause. And often the successful people that I work with, all type A, running, and it's like, take that breath, stop for a second, reflect, understand like what is actually going on here for you, for the people around you. And only then do you want to respond, not react, because that pause really gives us the ability to not just, go from, also what I really like, Daniel Kahneman's distinction between system 1 and system 2, where system 1 is a bit of a lizard brain that is just automatic, right? It's like we don't think, we just do. System 2 reflects, thinks. It's a lot slower. Now, sometimes, it's great to have system 1. If we're about to touch a hot stove, we want to automatically not do it. But sometimes we use system 1 too often. We talk too quickly. We don't pause. We don't take the time to really think things through and then respond, not react. So I think that the pause is a great tool to also, when we're talking now, if it's boundaries, if it's trust, okay, I'm going to pause. I'm not just going to say yes. I'm not just going to say no. I'm going to think, what are the implications? I'm going to be intentional, and then I'm going to respond.
Yeah. And I think so many of us, type A driven, and really anyone, that pause is a luxury that we can't afford. There's so much, there's time, to just be moving. But what I've seen in my experience over the years with my businesses and the people that I work with is it actually moves you, it moves you faster in the long run. It gets you where you're going, and it helps add to those building blocks so that we can live and lead sustainably, so that we can build the trust, and so that we can establish some boundaries. Can you talk a little bit about boundaries? I know when we were talking in the green room, you said you've got a blog coming out about that. And I'm a big believer. I love me some boundaries.
So my blog coming out is about saying no, and I had multiple conversations with people where for some it was no was the word of the year, for some that I've worked with over different periods of time that struggle with saying no. And I think before we sort of get to what you can do, I also think it's important to reflect, pause, reflect, and think about where it's coming from. Is it because you feel like you need people to like you? Are you very conflict averse? It can come from so many different things. To sort of pause and try and understand that. Now, the other side of it, then, what I really like to suggest to people is to flip it a little bit and to not just think about, I'm going to say no, but to think that every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else.
Always a trade-off.
Because our time is limited, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to think of that. And another really important thing, I learned that from Marshall Goldsmith, is to let people know what you're working on. So if you want to make this change, right, and you're going to start saying no, you're going to get reactions from people. Like, you're saying no? You never say no. Well, I'm working on saying no. So then you're going to quickly identify who are your supporters as well, and maybe who are the people who are manipulating you a little bit and are just thinking about their priorities. And it comes back again to intention, right? The boundaries, like thinking back, what's important to you? it can be what's important to you in your personal life. No, you can't work late tonight, whatever. It can also be what's important to you to achieve the goals for your department, for your role. So pausing before you say yes, before you say no, really sort of taking into account what are the implications. Okay, I say yes, I say no, I say yes. What does that mean? And feeling comfortable getting back to the people and saying what you think. Sometimes it's okay to come back and say something like, look, I can't do this. I can't help you with this project. I've got all these other things going on. I can do this part,
Right.
or I can help you next week, or something like that. But not just jumping to an old habit of saying yes and not protecting yourself. And you talked in the beginning about burnout. Not having boundaries is the biggest contributor to burnout.
100%. And as you're talking, I'm sitting here tying this, which is so clear, but boundaries allow people to trust us when we're saying yes and we're saying no to something that we're going to follow through on. That builds the trust. And when we build the trust is when we can truly build the culture. And leading with intention, authenticity, and integrity. And when we do that, it is so much more sustainable than trying to do it all and not having sort of that North Star, that focus of where we're moving ourselves, our team, and the organization towards.
Yeah, we can't do it all. It's a fact. We can't do it all. We have to prioritize. And when we come back from that place of intention, of really being clear about what's important to us and what's our values, it becomes easier to say no. And it's also, if you think about it long term, then you're going in the direction that you
Right.
really like to head to.
Right. And it all starts with ourselves, right? In order for us to lead our teams, our companies, whatever it may be, we need to be sitting in that authenticity, intention within ourselves, and trusting that we have the ability to say no and the ability to say yes to what's going to move the dial.
And it comes back to a pause, Lisa, right?
I know.
Because
I
like,
love that.
because it comes back to like take a moment and really think like, what are your intentions? What's important to you? What are your values? What are your priorities? What is it that you'd like to accomplish? And get to know yourself as well. It's like, okay, what are your strengths? What's going to help you accomplish that? What are your weaknesses? What are going to be your obstacles sort of holding you back? Because it comes back to what we talked in the beginning, to align your talk with your actions. You got to create this self-awareness on the organizational and on the personal level, so you can build that trust and walk the talk.
Love it. I love it. Foundational, the building block, pause. Then we're moving to everything else, right? Like, it's beautiful. Miki, believe it or not, we are at time. I could talk to you forever. This is just this. I mean, pause, habits, boundaries, like, oh, it's my jam.
I agree.
I'd love to ask you one question before we sort of wrap up. And that is what one habit or a boundary has supported you in living and leading a more sustainable life?
I don't want to repeat the pause.
Go ahead.
But I think, look, learning to take a deep breath. Okay. Yeah. And I think I had to learn to take a deep breath as a parent of teenagers. That's definitely a time to just learn to take a deep breath and shut up. Sometimes, seriously, just shut up and know when it's time to talk, when it's not time to talk. And that deep breath helped me align, helped me think, look at things a little bit differently, and sort of think, okay, because sometimes, you know, you get into, call it a funk or whatever you want to call it, and you're sort of, and the self-talk is going, but that pause is like, okay, what else is true out there? Yes, really to sort of just not react, respond.
Respond. I love that. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Where can people find you, reach out, all of that?
Miki Feldman Simon on LinkedIn. You probably it's connected to the LinkedIn Live here, so that's definitely one place you can find me. There's my website, I Am Back at Work. I am rebranding. There will be very soon a website, Miki Feldman Simon, so that's coming. And I'd love to connect with people, reach out.
Yeah, if you connect, please mention that you saw Miki on our LinkedIn Lives and Facebook and YouTube and all the other streams that we've got going on here. But Miki, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your brilliance with us today.
Oh, thank you, Lisa, for having me here today.
You're welcome.
Enjoyed our conversation.
I am always thrilled to talk about a pause. So thank you. Next week, please join me February 1st, my sister's birthday. I'm going to be talking to bestselling author C. Jane Taylor, 10 a.m. East Coast, 7 a.m. for those on the Pacific Coast. And please join us. Everyone have a fantastic week. Thanks again, Miki.
Thank you, Lisa. Bye-bye.